everyone. Let me just start by giving you some recap into the background of Russia. Right, so if you recall from the lesson, if you were there, you would remember that Russia is a really big country. You can see the stats there. I don't think I need to go through them with you in detail once again. You can see compared to Singapore how big Russia is, both in terms of land area as well as in terms of population. And it's really important that you understand this because this would shape events in Russian history. And Russian history, of course, forms a very important component of your elective history syllabus. So it's important for you to grasp these overarching facts or these ideas about Russia. Okay, it really is a truly amazing country. Okay, so this is in terms of its size. Other aspects of it, in terms of weather, you can see, alright, how the temperature can really change from being so warm, right, almost 10 degrees higher than what we're used to in Singapore, to being so cold, right, far beyond what we can ever imagine, right? I remember I told the class that it's so cold in some parts during some times that if you had a kettle of boiling water and you poured it on the ground, by the time it reached the ground, it would be solid ice because that's how cold it can be, right? You can see the amount of snow and ice that there can be during winter time in Russia. Again, this will also be important in helping you understand certain events which took place in history later on. Okay. Demographics wise, Russia has 160 different ethnic groups, though most of them, 81% of the Russian people are actually people of Russia actually are ethnic Russian. So there are other ethnic groups such as there's some Chinese, some Korean, some Mongolian, some Ukrainians, Jews, all sorts of other ethnic groups, but the majority are ethnic Russian, 81%. Okay. Now, delving a bit into Russian history. Okay, 100 years ago, you can see this map that 100 years ago, Russia was actually even bigger. Okay, the Russian Empire is even bigger, stretching into parts which no longer are part of Russia today, such as over here, if you would know, this is Finland. Over here, this is Poland. Okay, here is the country of Kazakhstan, so on and so forth. But last time, all of this was part of Russia. Okay, it was even larger than it is today, a good almost 4 million square kilometers bigger than it is today. Alright, ruled by an absolute monarch, meaning a ruler who has all the power. Absolute means 100%, all of the power. He was known as the Tsar in Russian. Okay, he basically functioned as the emperor. 95% of its people were peasants, meaning farmers. Most of these peasants or farmers were poor. Okay, in other words, Russia was not a very rich country at that point in time. Alright, and by the early 20th century, living and working conditions had worsened rapidly. In other words, the lives of most of the Russian people, and most of them were peasants, was really quite bad. Okay, so you can imagine a lot of discontent and unhappiness at that point in time. So, other events which have taken place, you already have learned about World War I. Okay, Russia actually was on the side of the Allies, which included the big three. I hope you can remember who the big three are. If you don't, please pause the video, do your research before carrying on watching this video, because you have to remember the big three, okay, from chapter 1. Okay, so they had entered on the side of the Allies in World War I. However, before the end of the war, 1917, you know the war ended in 1918, it was struggling to cope with its involvement in the war. Okay, and many Russians were unhappy because they had lost a lot of people, a lot of casualties, a lot of their soldiers had died, and the economy was not functioning very well during the war. Okay, and hence most people lost confidence in the rule of the Tsar. This was the Tsar at that point in time, the last Tsar, Tsar Nicholas II. They were hungry for a change in government. Okay, so they were not happy with this man. Okay, it was almost like there was a target on his head, like what you see here. Okay, and they were hungry for change in government, and a change in government is what they got. Okay, so Russia eventually pulled out from World War I. Okay, and to make things even more chaotic, there were two what we call revolutions. Okay, you can see what a revolution is there. Okay, use of violence to overthrow a government. Okay, and so the Tsar was overthrown. That was the end of him. Okay, and he and his family and their servants were found. Okay, and they were all basically all executed. Okay, all people they were all shot, and in fact their remains were they were buried and their remains only discovered many years later. Okay, but that's another story. I can tell you more about that in class. Quite tragic, actually. But anyway, okay, two revolutions. So there were two, not just one, but two, okay, successful attempts to overthrow the government. Okay, the first one overthrew the Tsar, and the second one overthrew the government which had replaced the Tsar. Okay, and after that, a certain type of war called a civil war. Okay, you can see the definition there. Basically fought within the same country, all right, but between two or more groups in that country. Okay, took place over control of Russia. What were these groups? Basically, we can summarize them as the communists and the anti-communists. Okay, just a bit of disclaimer. I am simplifying things. I'm glossing over a lot of details, but I'm just giving you the basic outline of what happened, because this part actually is not examinable yet, but you do need to know this in order to understand the events which are examinable later on. Okay, so between the communists and the anti-communists, now the communists, they won this civil war in the end because they were more unified and they had more skill, militarily speaking. Okay, and of course they had strong support from the largest group of people in Russia, who are everyone say together, I trust you said it, okay? And after the communists took over the Russian government, eventually the country became known as the USSR, which stands for Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or we also can call it the Soviet Union. Okay, so just bear in mind that when we talk about Russia under communist rule, we use this name, okay, USSR or Soviet Union. Okay, so when you hear these, don't get confused. It basically refers to Russia under control of the communists. And what is communism? You can see here the symbol of communism. You should be able to recognize here a hammer, this over here, and this crescent-shaped tool is called a sickle. So the hammer is associated as a tool of the working people, okay, in the factory, so on and so forth, the workers, and the sickle is a tool associated with the peasants or farmers. All right, so the communists basically wanted to get the support of the working people in the cities as well as the working people in the countryside, who were the farmers. It's an ideology which is basically a set of ideas on how to run a country. What were some of these ideas which are associated with communism? Okay, one, all people were regarded as equal, right? That's why you see all these poor people, this would have appealed to them, because they would see that, you see, there's no such thing as richer people who are more powerful or richer than them, all right? Everyone would be equal. Other ideas, okay, workers would be paid according to their ability and needs, rather than being having no choice but to be paid lowly even if they work very hard, right? So basically this was a promise to them that if they worked harder, they would get the reward. Okay, all property now would be shared rather than being privately owned. So that means there'll be no more rich people who own everything, but everything would be shared by a group of people. Okay, so in other words, there's supposed to be more equality. Basically, these ideas are very much linked. Okay, the needs of society, especially the poor, who are the working majority. So in most societies, the majority of the people are poor, and they are, not very rich, and they do not have a lot of power. But in a communist society, these people, their needs would be more important than the needs of the rich or wealthy minority. Okay, so it's quite a revolutionary system, you could say, quite a different system, okay, from what perhaps you are used to in Singapore. Okay, so it's important to recognize this. Right? So I just leave you to think about this for a while, and we will address this question in class. If you're one of the poor workers in Russia in 1910s, okay, why would you want to support a communist government in Russia? Think about it, okay? And I want you to answer this question when we take it up in class. Okay, so moving on. So you can see here some illustrations of the appeal of communism very quickly. You can see they wanted peace, because remember, Russia was involved in World War I, and they wanted the country to be out of World War I. Right? You can see the reasons there. And Lenin, the communist leader, he promised to end the war. So you can imagine this would gain him more support, okay, from the Russian people. That's in terms of peace. How about in terms of land? Okay, the peasants. So imagine, the peasants, they were working hard on the land, but they were not necessarily the owners of the land. They worked for richer land-owning peasants, okay, richer land-owning farmers, okay, and they wanted a fairer system of land redistribution where they were able to have more control over what they're doing in their land, Okay, so communism advocated the equal distribution of wealth among the people in the society. So there'll be no more inequality in terms of land ownership and distribution. So you can imagine the peasants would be quite happy with communism in this regard. Okay, thirdly, in terms of bread, okay, excuse me, all right, okay, there was a severe shortage of food supplies in the cities, okay, and so there's a lot of hardship, and the communists promised more food. So imagine if you are lacking in food and the communists promise you more food, of course you would be supportive or more likely to be in support of the communists. Okay, so this was a situation which gave the communists a greater draw. All right, okay, and so how was the USSR ruled under the communists? Very quickly, it was authoritarian, which means the Communist Party forced the people to obey its orders. People had no choice. Okay, people had no choice. This is what, and the term for this to describe this is authoritarian. Okay, importantly, people had no choice of who to run the country, who would run the country. It was also centralized. Decisions were made by the central government in Moscow. Moscow is the capital of Russia or the Soviet Union. Okay, so this is a bit of an illustration for you. All right, if you can see here, okay, in a centralized system, is that of a not centralized but rather decentralized system where from the center decisions are passed down to certain sub centers, and from here further decisions are passed down. So this is what we call a decentralized system, where each of the, not all the power isn't concentrated at the center, but in this these areas, or what I'll call the sub centers, they also have some power. Okay, but in the Russian case, or the Soviet case, it was a centralized system. Okay, so in this way, the communists were able to control the country more efficiently and effectively, at least in theory. In practice, this may not always have worked out, but this was the idea, okay? Because there's no one to compete as to what is the decision to be made. Everything would be decided, and the decisions would be passed on very quickly, right? This was the idea. Okay? Now, there were secret police corps who were set up, okay, to monitor and eliminate those who were against communist rule. So in other words, they did not tolerate any opposition to their rule. Okay, this is the symbol of what we call the NKVD, which was the Russian secret police. We'll talk more about them later on. And see there, of course, the communist symbol, the hammer and the sickle. Any parties apart from the Communist Party, they were banned, and their members were arrested. Okay, so no nonsense was tolerated. Okay, the media was also tightly controlled so that the people were only exposed to news that portrayed the communists in a positive way. Okay, so here's an example. We have the communist newspaper called the Pravda. Okay, remember I told you a bit about the Russian alphabet. Now I'll maybe share with you a bit more about that in class, but you can see that this basically is the Russian alphabet or Cyrillic alphabet. This spells Pravda. This was the name of the Soviet newspaper, propaganda newspaper basically. So propaganda only portrayed the communists in a positive way. Now this should sound familiar to you, because this is similar to what you would have learned about propaganda in another country, Germany. Okay, if I'm sure you remember about Hitler and his propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. Okay, if you don't remember, please go back to your chapter 3 notes and have a look. Alright, but we'll talk more about this later on. Okay, so now we're going to look at Stalin's Soviet Union itself, okay, in two broad areas. This is now the examinable content. We'll be looking at what led to the rise of Stalin, as well as what was the impact of his rule. Okay, for this, the rest of this video will be focusing only on this part, so don't worry, we're not covering that much. Okay, but this is important. Number 1 forms the first big chunk of chapter 2. Okay, so how did Stalin rise to power in the USSR? Okay, basically, it came down to, remember Lenin, we talked about him. He was the leader of the Communist Party earlier on. Now this man here, of course, you can see him, he played a significant role in establishing the USSR. You can see well respected among the Communist Party members, and he was concerned about growing rivalries among the key members of the Communist Party, because under him there were a lot of people who were hungry for power, to want to take over from him. Okay, now specifically he had said that Stalin, Joseph Stalin, okay, could not be trusted to use his power wisely. Now, what is his testament? It's basically like a document which he wrote, which was to be shared with people after he would have passed away. So it's like a will. Okay, so this was what he had said. Basically, he did not trust Lenin. Lenin did not trust Stalin too much. All right, and after his death, so happened that there was a 5-year-long power struggle. Because remember, like I said, there were a lot of rivalries for who to take over from him. This power struggle broke out among several of the key communist leaders over who would succeed Lenin as the supreme leader of the USSR. And imagine, even though Lenin was not in favor of having Stalin take over, guess who emerged as the next supreme leader? It was Stalin. So now we want to find out, why was it that in spite of all of this, Lenin, who was well respected, right, he was the leader initially, why did the ruler get chosen, the next leader, why was the next leader someone who did not go according to Lenin's wishes? We're going to find that out. Okay, so we're going to look at it in terms of a game. Okay, so not who wants to be a millionaire, because in a communist society no one should be a millionaire, right? Everyone should be equal. Rather, we're looking at the game. Who wants to be a, okay, I know it's not as exciting, but just bear with me. Who wants to be a supreme leader of the USSR? Who are our players? Contestants, we have Kamenev, we have Zinoviev. Now, if you don't remember these two, well, try to, but these are not the two most important ones. The two more important contestants are Trotsky, and of course we have Joseph Stalin. Okay, and of course I already gave you the spoiler. We know who won this game. But, well, bear with me as we look at the reasons why it ended up being a certain person winning and the others losing. Okay, so what led to the rise of Stalin? Here's another picture of Stalin. Okay, basically there are three main reasons. Firstly, under L, Lenin's testament was unpublicized. Remember, we talked about how Lenin was very vocal in his, or rather he was very adamant that he did not want Stalin to take over, but his testament was not publicized, so people were not aware of it, or what of his views. Secondly, Trotsky, one of the contestants, was not very popular. And thirdly, Stalin had manipulated the situation, basically actions which he took, which helped him rise to power. Okay, a very ambitious man he was. So let's look at the first reason. Lenin's testament was unpublicized. What did Lenin say in his testament? Okay, he criticized everyone. Alright, all the main party leaders, in other words, all the people who potentially could take over from Lenin were criticized. But in particular, he said Stalin should be removed from his position of Secretary General of the Communist Party. Okay, here's an old picture of Stalin in his younger days and Lenin in his healthier days. Alright, Lenin was very clear that he did not want Stalin to be in the position of Secretary General. Alright, yeah, basically, this is what he thought. Okay, but after Lenin's death, the testament was read out at a meeting attended by pretty much all of Lenin's potential successors. But after hearing the testament, they agreed not to make it public. They agreed not to make the information in the testament, which included the criticism of Stalin and the decision that the desire that Stalin not be the Secretary General. Okay, this was not made public. Why? Because they all felt very bad, very embarrassed, I guess, that Lenin had criticized all of them. So they thought, well, we shall not make a big deal of this, because they did not want Lenin's criticism of each of them to be made public as well. Alright, so no notes were to be made of it. It was not to be mentioned in any future meetings. Okay, so Stalin got off, right? Because whatever Lenin said about him was not made public to the Communist Party as a whole, only among these most important members, right? But it was not to be made public to anyone else. Okay. Furthermore, some party members felt that someone else, okay, Stalin's main rival, who was Trotsky, was a bigger threat than Stalin, so they decided to ignore Lenin's warning about Stalin. Basically, this meant that Lenin's intentions in writing the testament were not realized. So basically, Lenin's testament did not pose an obstacle to Stalin, right? So this is one way in which Stalin was able to rise to power, because Lenin, who was well respected, Lenin's opposition to Stalin was not made known, so people didn't have the impression that Stalin was not a good ruler, at least from Lenin's point of view. Okay, it's important to remember that. So basically, Stalin remained as Secretary General of the party, and because remember the other two minor competitors, the contestants, Kamenev and Zinoviev, they felt that Trotsky was a bigger threat to their rise to power, so Stalin established an alliance with them against Trotsky. So very smarter in this sense, because Stalin knew that Trotsky was the biggest threat, so he worked together with other rivals to get rid of Trotsky. And he also remained as Secretary General, which was a big deal. We'll learn more about why this was a big deal in a moment. Okay, so that's the first reason. Second reason, Trotsky himself. Okay, look at him. He doesn't look like the most friendly and approachable of figures. Okay, he was seen as the most likely candidate to succeed Lenin as the leader of the Communist Party. However, he was also regarded as Lenin's right-hand man. He was the head of the Red Army, and they had led the communists to victory in the Civil War, remember. Okay, so because Trotsky in that sense was responsible for all of this, okay, leading the communists to victory in the Civil War, he was seen as a very capable individual who would be like a capable successor to Lenin, right? Furthermore, he had the support of the Red Army. Red Army is the communist force. Okay, the color which we associate with communism normally is red. Okay, so the Red Army, the Communist Army support. This gave Trotsky a great deal of power. But because of this, he was seen as the biggest threat by the other senior party members who also wanted to be the next leader, and he was very popular among them. Okay, he obviously doesn't look like the most popular guy, certainly not the most popular hairdo. But anyway, that's another story. Okay, he was seen as the biggest threat, and he was very unpopular among them. So this was why Stalin had managed to form an alliance with Kamenev and Zinoviev against Trotsky. Okay, now even though Trotsky was seen as Lenin's right-hand man, he was actually quite vocal in disagreeing with many of Lenin's plans. And because of this, okay, Trotsky was seen to have openly challenged the organization and policies of the party and been disloyal to Lenin. And remember, since Lenin was so highly respected, if Trotsky was seen to have challenged Lenin, this would make Trotsky look bad. So obviously this didn't do Trotsky any favors in terms of helping him rise to power, right? Okay, yeah. So why do you think this made Trotsky more unpopular? You should be able to answer this for yourself. I already explained it for you briefly there. Okay, Trotsky and Stalin, they also had disagreed over the future of communism. Okay, Trotsky believed in something called permanent revolution, which means communist influence should be spread everywhere, worldwide. Okay, how does this differ from Stalin's view? Stalin believed in socialism in one country. In other words, let's strengthen communism in the USSR. Okay, by the way, socialism for now, just understand it as communism. Okay, it's just another word for it. So Stalin believed that communism should be strengthened in the USSR first before they think of spreading it elsewhere. So these were different views on how to deal with communism, how to spread communism. Trotsky said, spread it everywhere. Stalin said, yes, we can spread it everywhere, but make sure it's strengthened in the USSR first. Okay, so different views. The party members preferred Stalin's view. Okay, I think you can understand why. More realistic, safer option. Okay, hence, Trotsky's standing within the party was further diminished. Okay, so this only made Trotsky even less popular and even more lowly regarded than he was before. Okay, more aspects of his unpopularity. He happened to fall ill around the time of Lenin's death, and he was too weak to organize his own supporters, so he he basically did not have a very strong and active support base, even though he was quite a capable person. Okay, and because he believed that he would succeed Lenin, he was complacent about building support among the party members. So already he's not very popular, he was weak to organize his own supporters, and furthermore, he didn't really think much about building further support among the party members, which of course would not do him any favors again in terms of popularity, right? Support base was also quite narrow, mainly consisted of the Red Army, we talked about them, youth and students. So narrow support base meaning that his support did not cover a wide range of membership of the Communist Party, but is limited to that of the Red Army and young people. Okay. So this is Trotsky there with the Red Army. So he may have been very popular among them, but speaking from an overall perspective, he did not have a very strong support base. It was too narrow, not diverse enough. Okay. Furthermore, you saw his face. He doesn't look like the most humble of people. He was seen by most party members as arrogant. And so, all this caused other party members to exclude him from the decision-making process. This only would serve to weaken his position in the party. Alright? So again, if his position is weakened, this can only be to the advantage of his rivals, and in particular, Stalin, of course, right? This is where now we get to Stalin's manipulations. The last main factor is the reason why, in the reasons why Stalin rose to power and succeeded Lenin, and not anyone else. Okay, so what were his manipulations? Firstly, he pretended to be close to Lenin. Secondly, he used his position as Secretary General. Thirdly, he exploited divisions within the party. Okay, so you can see, a very cunning man he was, right? These were the things he did. Manipulations means he takes particular action to be to his advantage, right? Manipulate the situation. Things weren't like that, but he took action to make things in that way. Okay, so first, he pretended to be close to Lenin. Now, while Lenin was still alive, when Lenin was not very well, he frequently visited Lenin when he was ill. Okay, this is a famous picture of Lenin and Stalin, alright? And he basically, by doing so, he gave party members and the general public the impression that they were very close and that Lenin had favored Stalin and trusted him to be his successor. Remember that Lenin's true views of Stalin were not made public, so this was the impression which they had of Lenin, they thought that Lenin had of Stalin, that they thought Lenin actually favored Stalin to an extent, right? So you see this picture here, okay, even though Lenin in reality may not really have been fully trustful of Stalin, but Stalin, okay, was very smart in making it seem as if Lenin really trusted him. Right, and this picture is a very famous one, alleged to have been doctored by Stalin. In other words, it was not really the case, right? But anyway, you can see here, right? Doesn't look like the most honest, trustable of faces, that's for sure. Okay. So after Lenin had passed away, Stalin put himself in charge of organizing Lenin's funeral. He made it a grand affair. He himself was the chief mourner. Okay, you can see here. This is Lenin's corpse, his body. This, of course, is Stalin. Alright, you can see there. So this gave the impression that he was very deeply sorrowful over Lenin's death. And remember, Lenin was so well respected that if you are seen to be close to Lenin and very sorrowful over his death, this can only work to your advantage. Right? Stalin also managed to keep Trotsky from attending Lenin's funeral by giving Trotsky the wrong date. Okay, so of course Trotsky was careless, but fair enough. Still, okay, Stalin was smart enough to know what to do, so Trotsky didn't attend the funeral. Of course, this would make Trotsky look bad as opposed to how Stalin looked, right? Because Trotsky was seen to have disrespected Lenin. Okay, so very happy Stalin must have been at that. So, of course, all these actions made Stalin look more like Lenin's natural successor in the eyes of the public, more so than than Trotsky was. Okay, remember we talked about the Secretary General position, which Lenin wanted Stalin to be removed from, but it wasn't because the testament was not read out. So, Stalin had the authority to appoint and reassign party members, and so cleverly he appointed his own supporters to powerful positions, and he replaced supporters of his opponents, especially Trotsky. Right? So you can imagine this will only make Stalin more powerful, because if his supporters are appointed to powerful positions, these supporters will be even more likely to support him because they owe their position to Stalin himself, right? So they'll be loyal to Stalin, all the more so. Right? So this helped Stalin build up the necessary support among the entire party to deal with Trotsky once and for all. So Stalin managed to have support from the entire party, people from all parts of the party, whereas remember we talked about how Trotsky had a narrow support base, right? Excuse me. So all this gave Stalin the advantage over Trotsky. So what then happened to Trotsky? Well, sooner or later his reputation was destroyed, his ideas were discredited, which means people no longer would have faith or belief in his ideas. His support, of course, was very limited within the party for all these reasons. And so, 1925, he was actually forced to resign as the head of the Red Army, with Stalin's help, of course. 1927, he was expelled from the Communist Party. He was forced to leave the Communist Party and also forced to leave the USSR, right? So he had to leave the country. And eventually, he was assassinated under Stalin's orders all the way in 1940. So even though he already had left the USSR and never returned, Stalin never forgot him and made sure that, okay, basically under Stalin's orders, he was killed. Okay, there is a video of a film on this, but maybe I can direct you to that in class. If you really want to watch it, do ask me and I'll show it to you. Okay, by the way, the key is, well, Trotsky was gone. Okay, very violent death at that. Okay, yeah. So, sorry, and back to here, remember his supporters. Remember, Stalin was able to, as the Secretary General, build up his support base and all that. This contributed to Stalin being able to expel Trotsky, get him exiled. Eventually, Trotsky ended up in Mexico and he was assassinated. Okay? Well, so basically, you can see here, okay, we have Lenin, alright, here, and we have Trotsky here, and Trotsky. But basically, Stalin was able to ensure that, okay, Stalin was able to ensure that Trotsky was then wiped out of the picture. Okay, almost literally, you can see that was the end of Trotsky. Okay, this is how Stalin managed to make use of doctored photographs in order to wipe out traces of his opponents. And one of the first people he was able to do this do this to was Trotsky. Okay, the end of Trotsky. We'll look at more pictures at a later date. Okay, and one final manipulation of Stalin. You can see manipulation number 3 was, okay, to exploit divisions within the party. So the party is such a big party, there will be different groups within the party. Okay, one group was called the moderates, one group was called the radicals. You can see the descriptions over here. So what did Stalin do to help his own rise to power? Basically, okay, he took advantage of this division, these two groups. He allied himself with both sides at different times as it best suited him, in order to help him get more support to eventually rise to power. Okay, so basically, after Trotsky was expelled from the party, remember that Stalin had an alliance with Kamenev and Zinoviev? Well, once their common enemy was gone, Stalin basically got rid of these two, broke the alliance, and eventually these two became isolated within the party. Okay, he switched alliances then to win the support of the other side, the radicals, and he removed other rivals from important positions in the party. So basically, he was playing both sides as it suited him best. Okay, so in the end, first we had Trotsky gone, then later we have Kamenev and Zinoviev gone, as well as other rivals, and so who is left? We have Stalin left as the supreme leader of the USSR. Okay, so this is a very quick summary of how Stalin came to be the leader of the USSR to replace Lenin, and we'll talk more about this in class and then later move on to the next portion. Okay, so that's it for now. Any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me. Thank you very much.